And welcome back. In today's video we have another Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord kind of interview video. Now this is going to be about why Bannerlord is basically being delayed, and this was an interview from the 17th of the 6th, so the 17th of last month. And it's quite an interesting interview. It talks about a few things to do with the game's features, but mainly to do with why the game's being delayed, and it does get pretty complex at times. The interviewee also discusses the process which Tailwards go through in order to get something in the game, and how particular the owner is about like having certain things in the game, but you'll see what I mean when we go through the interview. So the source website is from a Turkish website from which I just cannot pronounce, and the author is Hakivat, I think that's his name. And the actual article has been translated from Turkish, so I'm going to do my best to translate the translation into some form of like good worded English. So it's called The Reason for the Delay, an informal interview. So this entry actually comes from one of the popular sites from Turkey, which is like a Turkish Reddit. It doesn't surprise me that there's loads of these individual sites in the country, because literally everything's blocked. Like Wikipedia's blocked in there. I know things like Imgur are blocked over there. So I really feel sorry for you if you're in Turkey, because you're blocked from so many different things. Anyway, that's beside the point. So it begins with a little bit of introduction. So it says, this year around February, I had a chance to talk to a developer and a graphic designer of Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord from Tailworlds in Istanbul. I asked why the game is so delayed, and as you can imagine, they said they are faced with a lot of problems while they're working on the immersion of the game. So as you can see, they're really particular about the player being really immersed into the game. For Warband, whenever I'm playing it, I just get carried away and kind of play it for so long until I kind of remember what's happening, and then I just kind of close it because I've been playing for so long. And that's what they're trying to reflect in Bannerlord, making sure people just don't get bored. So the first question is more to do with the mechanics, and it reads, will castle walls, buildings or other static objects be destroyed with catapults or other siege weapons? Now I'm going to explain what the developer actually replied with, and then I'm going to talk about why what he replied with is affecting how long Bannerlord is taking to release. The developer replies with, yes, we are working on those things, but there is a problem. Let's say the building is destroyed. Particles from the destruction will be all over the place. Small or big particles from the building will be flying around after it's broken up, etc. So let's just say we're talking about a multiplayer game with loads of individual players. If we calculate an explosion of a wall or something like that, and have all the momentum of the separate particles in a physics calculation, they can use those equations to scatter particles from the destruction randomly. And what would that look like on every single PC? Well, I'm not going to be using the interviewee's words because it's very confusing, but basically, when I say basically, this is actually quite complicated and hard to explain. So say the wall is collapsing in front of me and all the particles are falling off it. Now on my screen, those particles will be landing in a random way, and also on another player's screen, those particles will also be falling in a random way. So that means all the particles will look different on each individual player's screen. This could be problematic because on my screen, another player might be glitching through a big boulder falling from a castle wall, but on the player that I've just seen that big boulder glitch through, on that player's screen, that boulder might be somewhere completely different because the particle scattering is like completely random on each individual screen. But it just shows that how much thought goes into game design and that kind of thing. The interviewer did actually ask why not just connect it all to one server and kind of have all the particles happen on the server at once, and basically the server won't be able to handle it apparently. So yeah, that's pretty much the particle effect of walls being broken down. I thought that was a really interesting bit of like game development. This is just a very important part of the game, and it also shows just how specific Tailworlds are being. Now, they could just completely remove the particle effect, and that would be something that would be basically really missed, and it is an exceptional thing, but it's this sort of thing that's causing the game to take so long to come out because they've got to work it all out, and this is just one example of probably thousands of different issues that they've come across in this game, and it's just adding different things that the company themselves just haven't worked on too much before, and the game designers themselves haven't worked on too much before, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But yeah, that's quite an interesting point, and it gives you a little bit of a better explanation of why the game's coming out a little bit longer than expected, rather than you just being left in the dark completely. Another question asks, who decides how the costumes, environment, shields, and armors should look like? So there is basically a graphic designer, and he says every single thing comes from Amogan Yavuz, who is like the head of Tailworlds. He tells us how it's going to be. He's going to say if it's going to be like this or it's going to be like this. We design it according to his instructions. We don't know anything before Yavuz tells us about it, and before we design anything, an extremely extensive research is done about clothes, shields, and armors for their historical realism, and then we design. So this is definitely one of the reasons why it's taking so long for Tailworlds to finish Bannerlord. They've just worked on immersion so intensively to make it as basically immersive and kind of as realistic and believable as possible. And to kind of try and solve those problems, it just takes a really long time. And it's all like the community feedback from things like E3, and I'm guilty of it myself, and a lot of other people are as well. It's not just me. Just saying what should be in the game, and Tailworlds just listen to the community, sometimes maybe a little too much, which I've just never heard from a games company before. But I just think they need to draw the line at some point and just get it out to people, because people are so desperate for it right now, and we've seen it at E3, and it does look playable. I don't see any reason for the battles and that kind of thing to be included in some form of alpha or beta. It may be like a little bit of a section of the single player map would be cool to see in a beta. I just think something needs to be released very soon. The interviewer then asks the graphic designer about Tailworlds, and he responds with, "This is not a massive games company. Armagan Yavuz is just an entrepreneur. Tailworlds started with just 2 people made from scratch. It is independent, and they're still on their kind of startup level." But I don't know. I'm not sure they're quite on their startup level. They've released in Fire and Sword. They've released Napoleonic Wars. They've obviously released Warband, and their first game, Mountain Blade. They're doing pretty well. They're not just on their startup level. I do disagree with that. So they do not have an army of software developers, just 50 employees. And I just think he's pointing out that Amagan Yavuz is kind of imagined in the past like Tailworlds is kind of his child, and he's involved with almost every department from software development to design and basically everything. So if he's basically not satisfied with something, that will not go ahead. He has to basically go through each individual thing and make sure it's correct. Just as the graphic designer said, it's just like his little baby, and he wants it to kind of be perfect. The next point is talking about the Bannerlord project development period and basically why it's taking so long. And being interviewed responds with, game development companies in Turkey just haven't shown how it should be done yet, and they don't really know particularly how it should be done yet. Tailworlds is one of the best ones in Turkey, but they still don't have enough experience, and they are on their startup period, which I've said personally I disagree with, but the graphics designer believes that this is true. He's also talking about how the community just wants them to add so much different things to the game, and how Armagan Yavuz is kind of the architect. So the team and Armagan are the product owners, and who are asking the development team to do certain things. The tasks are making a new game engine, reforming things, adding things that we are not aware of. So they're kind of going into an unexplored territory all the time. When things are added, they feel like they need to respond to the community when they're trying to make things, and it's just slowing things down even more. Whereas at this point, I just think people want the game, just as we've seen it in all the showcases. I just really hope it's out by the end of this year, or some form of playable form will be out by the end of this year. I just think it's been too long. It's getting to the point where it's just been a little bit too long, and people are starting to get fed up. So one of the tasks I just talked about in that little list is going into the field of unknown technology, things they don't understand, which is kind of anarchy for many developers. So he linked me this kind of graph that kind of helps explain where they are. So you have technology on the x-axis and requirements on the y-axis. And anarchy is in the very far right, where you have very far from agreement in terms of requirements and very far from certainty in terms of technology. And apparently that's where kind of Tailworlds are getting to at the moment. I think they're in the complex stage in the center. So basically what they're trying to say is that they know something has to be done and they want to do something, but they just simply don't know how they're going to do it using the technology that they have in that sort of situation, because they just don't know. They haven't done it before. I think that's something that we forget, that these game developers, they're still learning. They're still going to be learning new things, especially with a game being built from its own engine and not having like CryEngine or the Unreal Engine, etc. In order to solve this problem, they need to learn which technology they need to use for a specific thing in the game. And then once they've learned that technology, they can start doing it. But learning that technology does take a very long time. Anyway, that was probably quite hard to keep track of going through it. It's because the interview isn't written in the best English in the world, and to translate it was pretty hard. So I'm trying to get my point across as easy as possible without confusing you, but I've probably confused you somewhere along the way. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you do have a brilliant day, and I will see you. Probably never, because Bannerlord's never been released, but, you know, whatever. But I will see you, hopefully, in the next battle.